Okay, so take two. I just recorded this without any audio. Um, so today's challenge was reverse or rotate. And what it did, or what it asked us to do, was take a string and a size of a cut and turn that chunk and determine whether or not that chunk was divisible by 2. If it was, then reverse it, otherwise rotate it. And so the way that I solved this, so because I just recorded it, we're going to kind of run over my code instead of watching me code live. The way I ended up solving it is we first had 3 edge cases. If the size of the chunk is less than or equal to 0, if the string is blank or null, or if the size of the chunk is greater than the string's total length, return an empty string. Otherwise, we wanted to determine the size of the chunk, and then, so first we needed chunks, then we needed to determine if that chunk was divisible by 2 when each digit was cubed. And for today's code, I actually ended up using helper functions to help me do that. And the way that ended up looking was, first, if we got past these edge cases, then I turned my string into a chunk array, which was my name for it, using a helper function called split string. The way split string worked was I took the string, same inputs as I already had, and looped over it through a couple of different pieces. I've got the size of my step. I have the start index, the end index, a cap, which is the total length of the string, because I didn't want to keep going past that, and then my loops, so the number of loops that I needed. The number of loops that we actually ended up using was the floor of the cap divided by the step. Floor will round out anything, so if I've got a 19 character string and my steps are 6 characters, then that's going to reduce, or I will have 3 loops, for example, and then we just won't worry about the 19th character, which was one of the directions in here. Ignore the last chunk if its size is less than a C. And so once I loop through this loop, I return a new array with chunks the size of SZ. Then moving on, so that's my first step. I needed to get my strings into chunks. My second step is to figure out, is that element, that chunk, divisible by 2 when its digits are cubed. So I created a second helper function, digits cubed divisible by 2, that returns a Boolean, true, false. And I pass each element of my new chunk array into it. The way that function works, let's take a quick look. Very simply, it takes each element, which is a string, loops over it by taking the math power of the number of the element of I and cubing it. So it's important to remember that you can use indexing on strings, but you can't cube a string. Now, I didn't test this because you can JavaScript does use implicit coercion, so it might have worked, but I like to be explicit wherever possible and kind of focus on my types. Guess that's a habit that I picked up somewhere, because certainly JavaScript doesn't make you attuned to types quite as much. And then I ask very simply, is the total, if when the total is divided by 2, do you get 0, which would mean that there's 0 remainder? Modulo 2, not divided by 2. So there would be 0 remainder. If that's true, return true, else return false. And then if that's true, then I used my split reverse join here. And what that's doing is splitting a string, because again, each element in chunk array is a string, into an array where each element is a character. I'm reversing that array, so it's a built-in function of arrays to be able to reverse. And then I'm joining that array back into string based on each character or each element. So what this is doing is, in one line, I'm splitting a string into an array, reversing that array, and then collapsing it back into a string. And if it's not divisible by 2, I'm simply taking that string, taking a substring starting with the the 1th index, so the second character, and concatenating onto it the first character. So remember that when you use a substring, if you don't put an end, the character from the start through the end of the original strings are returned. So by not indicating the end, I went from the first character, or the first index, one index, which is the second character, all the way through the end, and then concatenated that last part onto the end, or the very first character onto the end of that string. And then I simply output it. And that was how I solved my reverse rotate. I liked this one a lot in that I was able to kind of come up with ways and places for helper functions. I've been looking over some of the other solutions, and some things that I could have explored include regular expression to look for patterns within my string and split that into an array. So maybe I'll give that a shot, but wanted to make you guys aware that that was also an option. See you tomorrow.